What is up, Doom Patrollers? Welcome to a brand new breakdown and review for episode 4 of season 2 of Doom Patrol, titled Sex Patrol. And now this is written by Eric Deitel and Tanya Steele. Once again, probably butchered those names. But either way, my first response to this, what an amazing episode, but what an absolutely random, absolutely crazy episode. Now this, consisted of Mr. Shadowy Evans, and that's how that plot kind of came in with the sex men and everything like that, which was absolutely fantastic. A very interesting and I would say faithful adaptation of the comic book counterpart. Not done the exact same way, just like how Red Jack was done differently, but from somebody who knows what typically goes down in the comics with Shadowy Mr. Evans and Red Jack. The way they did it on the TV show was just an innovative new way, yet faithful to the character. That was just actualized in such hilarity, if that's the right word. I don't know. Like, it was just, you guys saw this episode, it was just nuts. But what I also really liked about this episode, as crazy as it was the serious questions, I guess, posed, with Dorothy. I mean, because right at the beginning of the episode, we had the Danny the Street flashback, and I've even spoke about in previous reviews that she spent 90 years on Danny the Street, but also I was wondering, had she ever gone above and, interacted with the Dannysons or anything like that? And this episode really, really dives down that, almost to the point of Dorothy being a bit rebellious, and you can't really blame her at all, because even Danny is on her side with that. And obviously we've got Niles being very overprotective, but for the right reasons, but not necessarily the best outcome. So the episode began with a little flashback to London 1978, and we actually get to see inside Dorothy's room. Now I assume this is what Dorothy's room looks like inside Danny the Street, that little room in season 1, which, we never saw the inside of. I assume this is that room. And yet again, guys, it goes without saying, chemistry between Abigail Shapiro and Timothy Dalton was just wonderful in this scene. Any scene they're in, it's just such a great pairing. And there was, such takeaways from this episode, especially when Abigail Shapiro, or should I say Dorothy, was singing with Niles. That was, oh man, I didn't cry. But I like the way the show is really tackling the severity of the Candlemaker. Obviously, we've had such a flaming introduction to him with that flashback with Niles and at the circus. We got the true events of what happened. But every now and again, we get this response from Niles, which is really, dialed all the way up to the top with how worried he is whenever it comes to Dorothy saying something that might relate to a wish. So this started with Dorothy saying the sentence of saying, sometimes I just wish, and she was probably going to say, I don't know, to go out of this room and interact with the Danny sense, and that's when Niles just instantly got triggered, saying never say that word, wishes can have a terrible cost, which this is foreshadowing a very, very, very probably big cost that will happen later this season. I don't necessarily want to get into speculation right now about that. You guys can probably guess what that terrible cost will be. And I also found the next scene between Danny and Niles quite interesting, because it really contrasts the this beginning of the episode to the very end, with Danny, kind of standing up to the chief saying this can't go on anymore, because we had Danny pointing out to Niles that Dorothy needs her father, she can't stay here forever, and Chief says, as long as you're around, I know everything's going to be okay. When at the very end of the episode, it's like, well, this really isn't an option for Dorothy anymore. But this episode was, of course, about bringing back Danny the Street in some way or another, maybe just to Danny the Brick. And we got the help from the Dannysons. It was great seeing Flex arrive, morally corrupt once again. And this is when they were kind of pondering different ways of bringing back Danny. And that is when Morally Corrupt was saying how Danny is powered by the people, the love, the joy, the music. And that doesn't mean we can't resuscitate. So as a result of that, it was time for a party. And I don't know, I love Morally Corrupt. Great character. Great origin in season 1. And it was great bringing that back into this episode. There was a lot of moving parts in this episode, even if not fully delved into, like Larry, it was still trickling along his storyline from, for example, the funeral that he didn't really properly attend and all of that stuff. So I really appreciated scenes like that still being in this, despite everything else that was going on. I love how Flex flexed his muscles to add mood lighting to the room, spawning flowers, moving furniture. I mean, I'll never get tired of seeing Flex, and this episode was just perfect for him, because he had quite the role to play for Rita. And that brings me to Rita, because she was getting a little bit jealous of Flex's easy ability to kind of just use his powers, because she's having a bit of trouble tapping into the more heroic persona, if you will. Even though she got that lesson from Cyborg, she couldn't exactly hang that disco ball on the ceiling. And this kind of spawned a whole other kind of lesson, or should I say Flex helping her kind of understand her inner workings so she can attune her powers even more so than ever before, but after this experience that she has. But we'll get onto that experience a little bit later. But that moment between Flex and Dorothy was very, very sweet. I think, you know, I've really praised Dorothy, and Abigail Shapiro plays Dorothy in that every scene she's in, it's always some kind of sincere, sweet moment. No matter what character interaction she's having with a certain member, I'm always looking forward to it. I love her scenes between Rita. Rita's kind of like this mother figure. Niles obviously is the father figure, but a bit too overprotective. And then you see her workings with other characters like Jane in previous episodes, and how obviously Jane has lots of personalities and she can kind of relate to Dorothy, and vice versa, because Dorothy has lots of kind of potential abilities through imaginary friends. And now we got to see Dorothy with Flex, and Flex is just, you know, despite being this big kind of muscly exterior kind of guy, he's the most gentle guy. And Flex says to her that she looks lovely, because this episode, that was a question that was raised quite a few times by Dorothy, because she seemed quite self-conscious, to be honest, because, you know, he first said, why the long face? And her instant response was just that, you know, it's just the way I look, and that kind of got me right straight away. But yeah, this scene just kind of ended with Flex kind of flexing his ears to get Dorothy to fly and hang the ball. Love the kind of background theme that was playing in that moment as she was kind of floating. And honestly, I never thought about Flex interacting with Dorothy this season. It was just something that didn't come to my mind, but little pleasant surprises of scenes like this really do kind of tee up everything in an episode and just make it that much more kind of wholesome, because Dorothy is a wholesome character. And then once again, loved seeing the Rita scenes kind of being like I don't know, a maternal figure, I guess, and started putting lipstick on Dorothy so she could kind of, you know, for once simulate or have some semblance of what it's like to live a life outside the confines of what she's been used to for her whole life. And, you know, as she said herself, you know, being alive for 103 years, it's time to try and see what that's like. Even though Niles did try and wipe that off her, which, you know, even rubbed her up the wrong way even more, which kind of wanted her to kind of simulate that life even more throughout the episode through defying the bedtime and stuff. And it's like, damn you, Niles, let her be. I guess to him, this is a little girl who happens to remain the same age for over 100 years. So you can understand where he's coming from in a sense as well, where he almost doesn't want to see her grow up. Or, you know, a lot of 11-year-olds obviously don't put makeup on, so like seeing, I kind of get where Niles was coming from, but I also wanted that for Dorothy as well, for her to have a good time. And this is when the party turns up a notch, but not before they had that moment which, as I said, kind of brought me to tears, just because I felt like it really brought out the essence of Doom Patrol. For so many different reasons, to the point where it's almost endless. But this really sums up the theme when Dorothy sang Pure Imagination. Obviously, this is going to get to me because we have Timothy Dalton and Abigail Shapiro in a scene. You know what I think about that. But then we had this little girl, Dorothy, singing Pure Imagination, and I feel like obviously that's so representative of, you know, the wonder of Dorothy now going out into the world, first time in her life. That was such an incredible scene. You know, Abigail Shapiro is a great singer. I wish I could speak about this part forever, but you guys know what I mean. I trust that 99% of people took a similar emotional feeling I did out of that. And it was just wonderful. It really was. And that was the first kind of block of resuscitating Danny's heart. And that's when Danny started communicating a little bit, even though Danny was still broken in half as a brick. But yeah, God, I love that scene. It was just so special. And from this moment onwards, the party turned into more of a club situation. But we had some stuff going on in the underground, of course, in the meantime. And that is when we had the painter up top. We had Jane and Hammerhead kind of hashing things out, saying up there doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is Kay. The kid is down here, and she deserves better than your effing friends. Kind of just more emphasis on all of Jane's personality, saying, look, your friends and Chief aren't what's important. It's Kay Chalice. And obviously this follows on from the storyline of how there was a bit of an ultimatum put towards Jane in that intervention, saying you need to kind of drop your kind of addiction that is Niles Calder and the Doom Patrol. But it was nice to see that storyline for Jane trink along this episode, which saw Scarlet Harlot come to fruition in this episode, which, you know, one thing I will say, just jumping straight to it, I loved seeing that new personality from Jane, or should I say Diane Guerrero. I love any personality she brings out. But in the promo photos, I'm just going to mention this, and maybe I don't see why it would have been in the official copy rather than my review copy. In the promo photos, you saw Jane singing on stage, or should I say Scarlet Harlot, and it was Fever in the background, so it was going to be a very kind of seductive kind of performance by Scarlet Harlot, but for some reason that was cut out. You can even see like Morally Corrupt in the audience there. It seemed like there was this kind of couple of scenes that were dedicated towards that, but for some reason it didn't make the final cut. That would have been great to see, because I really enjoyed seeing Scarlet Harlot this episode. She was hilarious in many different ways, which I'm sure I'll visit a couple of times later on in this video. But speaking of Scarlet Harlot, that's when she kind of goes over to Vic, and Vic has returned to Doom Manor. I told you guys that he would be returning, even though his storyline started a little bit separate this season for Victor. Don't worry, he's not outside the Doom Patrol. He's very much so intertwined with their story still, and don't worry, Ronnie will still be coming back. I also absolutely adored Rita trying to get Larry to dance. That was just brilliant. I loved the kind of awkward kind of body language he was giving off initially, but then you thought, oh, screw it, like he's gonna try and enjoy himself. So, you know, he's come quite far from obviously the first time he was on Danny the Street. And of course, Larry was trying to be cool when that guy starts to dance with him, but he kind of scared him away by saying that his bandages, if they were taken off, everybody would melt. So not the most smoothest, but we understand that Larry hasn't really had any kind of game experience with the dating field in a long time. This is when Rita is captured by Flex's ability to flex his pecs and get those cupcakes, which put the idea in her mind that maybe he should recreate what they did last season, because he pointed out saying that he has this clarity of mind and that allows him to, I don't know, be in attunement with his abilities. So yeah, Rita's just like, well, the only time I remember being that mind cleared was when you did what you did by flexing your muscles and causing everybody to have a very good time, if you know what I mean. So that was recreated, and I almost couldn't believe what was unfolding in front of my eyes. I was like, really, are we about to go into a room? Flex is about to flex a certain muscle, and Rita is gonna, you know, have a great time. They're actually going to do that. Oh, okay. I'm all in. But as Rita said herself, don't question her process. I'm not questioning it. This was very entertaining. And as Flex said himself, with great muscles comes great responsibility. You know, long story short here, that was all absolutely hilarious. This spawned the whole sexual kind of paranormal, shadowy Mr. Evans coming in, which caught the attention of the sex men and started off that whole story, because you thought that this episode couldn't get crazy enough as it is. You know, we were trying to resuscitate Danny. We've got Dorothy going off doing one thing. We've got Cliff on ecstasy. We've got Rita having such a good time that she's attracting this interdimensional sex demon. You couldn't make this stuff up. But other than Doom Patrol. But I'm telling you, that little montage of birds, animals, and then it went all the way to that location where Mr. Shadowy Evans was kind of hiding, I don't know, chilling out. That was just hilarious, you know, very symbolic of the experience Rita was having. But yeah, it was interesting that Mr. Shadowy Evans was in Kathmandu, Nepal. I believe he has this whole other interdimensional space, but I guess he's chilling out there as his sex demon self. But that is when, very accurately to the comics, he has this little scope that comes out of his head, and he could pick up the sexual energy, I guess, that Flex was and Rita were creating in that room, which, you know, brought him to Doom Manor to spawn the sex ghosts and bring on, as in the comics, he's like this harbinger of the apocalypse, and that kind of causes the whole world to go in this kind of libido-esque, lustful situation, rather than in this episode, the way they adapted it was just Doom Manor. We had sex ghosts going around. It was done a little bit differently, but still very likable and decent way to adapt it to a Doom Patrol live-action episode. But also at the same time, this brings up what I've been talking about long before, since I even reviewed the first episode, and that is from my breakdown videos of, you know, going over what April Bowlby teased of what's to come for Doom Patrol in Season 2. And as Jeremy Carver said, for everyone, this season's kind of about growing up, coming to terms with relationships as parents. That applies for Niles to Dorothy, Cliff to his daughter, Jane, and just everyone, you know, with their parents and them as parents as well. So this is where we finally got to see a little bit more of Rita's exploration, and that is when we got flashbacks to Burbank, California in 1931, where you see her mum saying that she'll get Rita the part, and that is when she basically had to come to terms with this repressed memory, I suppose, of her mum kind of, you know, having a little exchange with the casting director or whoever that guy was in order to get her daughter the part. And this also comes off the tail of when obviously Dr. Time said to Rita that your mum was right about you. You'll never be anything more than just a fraud. So, you know, Rita has a lot of baggage there that goes all the way back to her mother, maybe her father as well, but probably mainly her mother. And it's going to be interesting to see how this is further explored because this seems to be quite a impediment almost for Rita. Now, poor Dorothy got told to go to bed from Niles because it's bedtime, and this is where things got, you know, picked up in an interesting direction for Dorothy for the rest of the episode, because this is where things really start to go from, oh, party, everything's going well, let's sing Pure Imagination, to, oh, this is a reminder of how I've been locked away before, I'm not respected as an adult, even though she is an adult, but you get where she's coming from as a kid. A lot of kids go through that anyway, that kind of rebellious kind of mode, even though Dorothy did it in the most kind of sweet way in this episode. So, you know, Candlemaker starts talking to her saying that she should go back, and Dorothy herself points out that he barely even sounds himself and that Candlemaker never even used to talk this much, and he just keeps replying back saying Dorothy's grown up, Herschel is a friend for a little girl. And that's when she, you know, you can tell that this psychological manipulation on behalf of Candlemaker is working, because she's like, well, I am 103/4, and that's what this whole episode is about. And you can even take that right to the very end from Candlemaker's perspective. Like, that's what I mean when I say that's what this whole episode is about in terms of Candlemaker. It seems that he is really trying to psychologically manipulate her into making that second wish, even distancing himself from her by the very end to try and get her to then come over to him and almost even look up to him in a different way, because he really is being smart about this, and you can tell through the way he's tempting her but also then pushing her away, so that actually has the opposite effect in her seeking him out even more in episodes after this. So this is where several things start happening at once in the episode. We had Niles with Robot Man very briefly. Niles suggests adding ecstasy to his nutrient tank, so he starts going nuts at the party, and even Dorothy starts partaking in her first vodka martini, but she's caught out by Danny the Street. But guys, if you thought the dial has already been turned up, it gets turned up even more, because this is when the sex men arrive and things just got, yes, they're a real thing in the comics. I've been over this in previous videos, but this is where stuff got crazy. They were there for a potential worldwide sex extinction. They burst in, they said they're here to save the world for a paranormal sexual event. They refer to their car literally as the sex machine. And basically, the situation was that earlier this evening, the scanners picked up a powerful and sustained spike in hypersexual energy, and well done, Rita. You kind of caused that to happen through Mr. Shadowy Evans now coming to Doom Manor and emphasizing that sexual energy to the point of where it could bring about the end of the world in the most random way. I mean, oh my god, like that scene towards the end of the episode with the baby had me almost in tears of laughter. Now, due to Shadowy Mr. Evans being in Doom Manor, as I kind of briefly teased earlier, we had these ghosts having sex, and they were literally known as sex ghosts. That is their single task in the afterlife or something. They were just going around doing what they do everywhere, and it was just some of you may view this very weird. It is very weird, but it is such a charming quality to this show for me. Like, all of this absolute ridiculousness is what I love. I'll take more sex ghosts in the future. Why not? We also had Jane going to the sex machine to speak to Cuddles, and this is where, like, he kind of explains the situation of what happens if the child is born, and if it cries, then that spells the end of the world. And this is where we literally see Shadowy Mr. Evans in this kind of like sexual portal with that pregnancy that's just increasing in size up until the point of where he gives birth to the baby. Everything at this point, like, even my thoughts are going crazy right now. I'm just like Cliff, you know, the typical what the F. It's just, I don't even know how to break this down anymore. That moment when Diane Guerrero's Hammerhead walked in was just absolutely hilarious. I can only imagine how fun it is filming a scene like this. I love when she walked in. She instantly, obviously, experienced the absolute overpowering wave of sexual energy, just kind of like they did last season. And even one of the sex men started coming under the spell of Shadowy Mr. Evans' sexual demon powers. This is so good to get demonetized. But yeah, that was just hilarious. Absolute twist in expression. But Hammerhead manages to approach even closer to where the baby is and shoves the baby up Shadowy Mr. Evans, which as a result sends him back to his kind of dimension, or just Nepal, I suppose. But yeah, what an interesting way to kind of have this at the very height of the episode. Like, you have Rita and Flex in the background, just not even knowing what they've contributed to cause this whole situation. It's just all very Doom Patrol, and it made this episode definitely one I'll never forget. And even though I've just dived into all of that other side of things, we can't forget how there was a lot of continuing and ongoing moments with Candlemaker and Dorothy. Candlemaker was still saying to Dorothy, no bedtime stay. He was really trying to make her stay in the party. No more prison. Literally points out that Danny equals prison. Like, so do you really want to go back there? So Dorothy literally got to the point where she was psychologically manipulated by Candlemaker to almost destroy Danny even more, because she asked him the question if Danny was truly ever her friend or her prison, and Danny even replies saying, Dorothy, I wish I could say I was only your friend. And that's when Candlemaker points out that Dorothy sees the truth, and it's like, whilst Danny is her friend, he can't deny himself. Like, he won't lie to her saying, look, I kind of have been low-key keeping you here as in a prison-esque sense for 90 plus years, and that really hurt her feelings. So to the point of where she really doesn't want to go back. Don't forget that in episode 1, to snap her out of it, Niles said, don't make me lock you up again. Instantly, this is almost as scary for Dorothy, like being locked up again, as anything any kid or any person could ever imagine. So that's why she got driven to the point of where she almost was gonna destroy Danny even more, I suppose. I almost found that hard to believe, but this must be so deeply rooted for her that she was willing to almost do it. Even though she didn't, she dropped that kind of little dagger that she had. But also, we got to the point in the episode where Danny is now a tire, no longer Danny the Brick, and they take all of the Dannysons on a new kind of love adventure. Don't worry, guys, I'm sure we will be seeing Danny again. Whether it's this season or not is a very good question. I think they could fit Danny in some way or another, but we're going to have to wait and see. I don't know. I'm a bit iffy on that one. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Don't forget, we've only got 9 episodes as of where it stands right now in this season. I also felt very bad for Dorothy at the end there. Like when she asked Rita, saying if she meant what she said about being beautiful. And that's when Rita responded saying that she has other talents. Focus on those. And that didn't exactly come off well. And that's kind of what her mother said to Rita. So I felt very sorry for Dorothy in that moment, because, yeah, that kind of didn't sound so... It's just like, okay, you're not good looking to most people, but don't worry, you have other things going on. And it's just a bit like, Rita didn't know. As I mentioned way earlier about Candlemaker, in this moment, that's when Dorothy reached out to Candlemaker. And in a kind of like reverse psychology kind of way, he pushed her away by saying, no, go speak to your other girl, little friends kind of thing. And basically, I think that's only going to contribute to Dorothy playing into his hand eventually when he decides to be like, oh, so you're coming back to me now. Okay. So here's a wish, and then things are just going to get way worse if she does fulfill another wish. But I think we all kind of realize that's fairly inevitable at this point. But I think that's more or less everything to this episode. It was kind of like a little in-between-y-esque kind of episode with a lot of exploration in different areas going on. Obviously, it was very kind of self-contained in such a way that it didn't really lean on going down any specific roads, but it still managed to like pertain to all of the characters and their story arcs or subplots that we've come to learn about from previous episodes, but also heavily brought in Danny the Street again, or Danny the Brick, or Danny the Tire, but also, gave a lot of development, because I think what transpired between both characters, Candlemaker and Dorothy, in this episode will be very significant for the future in the ways I've pointed out. So I absolutely adored this episode, definitely one of my favorites, but I would love to know your thoughts down in the comments below, guys. As usual, there's a lot to talk about. I read all of your comments, I really do, but also if you want to talk to me further about Doom Patrol, you can join my Discord server, which is just in the video description down below this video, but also other places to support me, such as Patreon, or just follow me on social media, which is my Twitter page, my Instagram. But I think that's absolutely everything, guys, so thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you Doom Patrollers in the next video. Goodbye.